The Fallout universe has always been a strange blend of retro charm and atomic ruin, a place where the absurd and the profound exist side by side. Even in the smallest details, there's a story waiting to be noticed. And tonight, we'll drift through them all, one by one, letting each little piece of trivia become another lullaby from the end of the world. The first Fallout game, released in the late 1990s, built by a small team at Interplay, and it began as a project called Vault 13, a GURPS post-nuclear adventure. The team had planned to use the tabletop rule system GURPS, but licensing fell through, and that's when they created the special system standing for Strength, Perception, Endurance, Charisma, Intelligence, Agility, and Luck. That simple pivot shaped every Fallout game since. Even the original menu icons for the special stats were hand-drawn by Leonard Boyarsky, who would later help create Vampire the Masquerade, Bloodlines, and The Outer Worlds. In that same first game, the Pip-Boy interface was inspired by old military technical manuals and World War II radio schematics. The developers wanted the Pip-Boy to feel like an analog computer from a future imagined in the 1950s, a mix of knobs, levers, and green glow. The Pip-Boy 2000 model even had tiny labels and warning text you could barely read unless you zoomed in on the sprites. Vault Boy, the smiling mascot everyone recognizes, wasn't originally called Vault Boy at all. He was simply the Pip-Boy. His thumbs-up pose has often been mistaken as a radiation test gesture, as if measuring distance from a mushroom cloud, but the truth is simpler. It was just a cheerful marketing pose drawn by the artists at Interplay to capture optimism amid nuclear gloom. The myth about measuring blast radius came later from fans, spreading quietly through forums until it became canon in spirit, if not in text. In Fallout 2, the design team hid dozens of pop culture nods, from the talking plant named Seymour to the Bridge of Death encounter, referencing Monty Python and the Holy Grail. They even included a crashed whale and flower pot in reference to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The developers were encouraged to sneak in jokes as long as they fit the tone of absurd apocalypse, and the result was a wasteland filled with quiet humor that balanced the darkness. One of the strangest characters in Fallout 2 is a ghoul named Typhon, said to be the son of Harold, the mutant tree ghoul who appears across multiple games. Typhon's inclusion was a last-minute addition meant to connect generations within the lore, a reflection of how even in a ruined world, legacy persists in unexpected ways. When Bethesda took over the series for Fallout 3, the shift from isometric to first-person caused heated debates inside the studio. Some developers worried the game would lose its strategic roots, but the team, led by Todd Howard, leaned into immersion instead. They used Oblivion's engine as the foundation, transforming it with radioactive lighting and vintage radio filters. The opening of Fallout 3, being born inside Vault 101, was inspired by a desire to make players feel the world before stepping into it. Howard said in an interview that it was meant to earn the moment when the vault door opens. And a next for why. That vault door scene was animated using real-time lighting adjustments to mimic a sunrise, giving the illusion of emerging from darkness into light, both literally and symbolically. Many players remember pausing there for the first time, just staring at the ruins of Washington, D.C., with a soft breeze playing across the broken road ahead. The radio stations across Fallout have their own quiet stories. Galaxy News Radio's host, Three Dog, was voiced by Eric Dellums, who was so beloved by fans that Bethesda later invited him back to tease Fallout 4 through Twitter hints years before its announcement. Every song used on the station had to be cleared through painstaking licensing deals, since many were real world recordings from the 1940s and 50s. Tracks like I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire by the Ink Spots became more than background music. They defined the emotional identity of the series. Fallout's obsession with pre war brands and mascots goes deep. The design of Nuka Cola bottles was inspired by the Space Needle and classic rocket toys, symbolizing the optimism of a future that never came. In Fallout 4, the Nuka World DLC expanded that concept into an entire park, complete with a functioning monorail and lore suggesting the company had more security staff than maintenance workers. The Brotherhood of Steel's emblem, a sword piercing gears and wings, originated as a hand-drawn sketch on notebook paper. The symbol's simplicity made it easy to reproduce across multiple iterations, but it also reflected their philosophy, a union of knowledge and might, both mechanical and spiritual. Early drafts of the Brotherhood were even darker, depicting them as techno-zealots, hoarding knowledge in isolation. Later games softened them into complex factions, torn between ideology and survival. In Fallout New Vegas, the development team at Obsidian had only about 18 months to finish the game. Despite that, they created one of the most beloved entries in the series. Hidden throughout the Mojave are subtle details that reward patient players. A skeleton in a bathtub with a bottle of Sunset Sarsaparilla, a crashed UFO north of Horowitz Farmstead, and a terminal log referencing the courier who refused to die. That last detail was meant to foreshadow the mythic aura surrounding the protagonist. The NCR flag seen in New Vegas is based on California's real flag, but altered with two heads on the bear, a subtle symbol of fractured unity. The team debated giving the NCR a new anthem, but budget constraints meant it was cut. Instead, the Ranger Armor's breathing mask became its signature sound, a quiet hiss that fans still recognize instantly. The Vault experiments remain one of the strangest pillars of Fallout lore. Each Vault had its own twisted social experiment, from Vault 11, which forced residents to sacrifice one person each year, to Vault 77, where a man was locked alone with a box of puppets. That last one comes from a Penny Arcade comic, officially endorsed by Bethesda, showing how dark humor and tragedy coexist in the Fallout universe. The iconic Fat Man mini-nuke launcher was inspired by real-world recoilless rifles, though its name came from the bomb dropped on Nagasaki. Its smaller counterpart, the Little Boy grenade, followed suit. Developers later admitted they never expected players to use the Fat Man so liberally, but it became an instant favorite because of its over-the-top absurdity, an apocalyptic toy in a sandbox of destruction. Even the tiniest creatures have history. The Radroach, for instance, was one of the first enemies designed for Fallout 3, chosen specifically because it let the engine show off real-time lighting when squashed. The team used scanned textures of dried leaves and bacon to create its glossy carapace. When players step on one, that subtle crunch was recorded from celery stalks being broken in a studio microphone. Liberty Prime, the towering robot from Fallout 3 and 4, has a voice inspired by 1950s anti-communist propaganda. His lines were written to mimic patriotic absurdity, but fans embraced him as both satire and symbol. During Fallout 4's development, the writers joked that Liberty Prime was the most American thing we've ever made. His rebuilt version in the Brotherhood questline even includes the old chip that once controlled his targeting, suggesting memory lingers even in machines. When Fallout 4 introduced settlement building, It was partly inspired by how fans modded Skyrim to make homesteads. The system let players rebuild the world piece by piece, echoing the theme of hope beneath decay. The most frequently built item, according to internal Bethesda data, wasn't a weapon rack or a bed, it was the humble chair. Players, it seems, wanted a place to sit and simply exist in peace. Nick Valentine, the synthetic detective from Fallout 4, remains one of the most emotionally layered characters in the series. His personality was meant to blend noir tropes with questions of memory and identity. His dialogue was recorded over several weeks to capture weary warmth, and many of his lines were improvised by the voice actor. The name Valentine was chosen to sound both tragic and gentle, a name that carries weight, yet still offers kindness. The world of Fallout isn't without humor hidden deep in its code. In Fallout New Vegas, there's an unused texture labeled "Don't look at this file," which developers slipped in as a prank. Another Easter egg buried in Fallout 4's game files is a reference to Todd's secret stash, a harmless nod to their director's habit of keeping hidden prototype builds. The Wasteland's flora has its quirks too. Mutefruit, one of the most common plants, is said to be a hybrid of apple, banana, and mango genes. It was designed to look edible, yet off-putting, reflecting how humanity's attempts to rebuild nature never quite succeed. The glow from glowing fungus was achieved by layering emissive textures in the engine, small details that make caves shimmer just enough to feel alive. And somewhere out there, in the endless dust, sits Dogmeat. The name has appeared across multiple games, always tied to loyal companionship. The Fallout 4 version was modeled after a real German shepherd named River, who belonged to the game's lead-level designer. River even visited the studio for recording sessions, and her gentle personality inspired how Dogmeat behaves in-game, nudging the player, waiting patiently, never attacking first unless threatened. The Fallout universe may be bleak, but it's also full of quiet care. Every rusted terminal, every lonely radio signal, every faded advertisement tells a fragment of humanity that refused to disappear. It's not just a story about nuclear ruin, it's about persistence, humor, and finding small comforts when the world seems beyond saving. The glow of a terminal screen is one of the softest lights in Fallout, that gentle green hue humming through dark rooms like a heartbeat. Every terminal has its own personality. The hacking minigame, with its strange mix of random characters and hidden words, came from an idea to make even reading feel tactile. In early prototypes of Fallout 3, terminals were meant to hum louder as you got closer, like a real CRT monitor buzzing in silence. The sound designers even used an old 1970s IBM machine as a reference for the tone. Behind the charm of the Vault-Tec Corporation lies a chilling consistency. Their smiling mascots and colorful pamphlets were inspired by 1950s advertisements for nuclear safety, the kind that reassured people that hiding under a desk could protect them from an atomic blast. Developers often referenced Duck and Cover, a real U.S. civil defense cartoon from the Cold War, as inspiration for Vault-Tec's cheery apocalypse. The tagline "Prepare for the Future" was designed to feel both comforting and threatening at once, like a promise and a warning wrapped together. In Fallout 3, the capital Wasteland hides dozens of small tragedies. The Dunwich Building, for instance, was a direct nod to H.P. Lovecraft's story, The Dunwich Horror. Its eerie whispers, dripping blood, and supernatural presence hinted that Fallout's world might hold horrors beyond radiation. The terminal entries that tell the story of Jamie, the scavenger descending deeper into the building, were meant to parallel a descent into madness. It was Bethesda's first experiment in environmental storytelling that functioned almost like a horror short film buried inside a game. Not far from that building lies another secret, a tiny house where two skeletons sit at a dinner table with a pair of intact wine glasses. There's no quest, no note, no explanation, just silence and dust. It's these quiet details that give Fallout its strange beauty. The wasteland doesn't need to tell you what happened, it just shows you the aftermath and lets your mind fill the gaps. One of the earliest design choices in Fallout's history was to make its post-apocalypse retro, not futuristic. Interplay's artists studied car designs from 1957 and imagined a world where that aesthetic never died. It's why cars in Fallout have massive fins and chrome smiles, why the music never evolved past crooning voices and big bands. The world froze culturally before it froze physically. Atomic power replaced oil, but style remained stuck in a time that never saw the 60s. The music of Fallout deserves its own shrine. Each track used in the radio stations carries real stories. Anything Goes by Cole Porter was chosen because it perfectly summarized the collapse of old morality in a world that kept dancing through disaster. Civilization, Bongo Bongo, Bongo by Danny Kaye and the Andrews Sisters was selected specifically for its lyrics about rejecting modern life and going back to the jungle, a satirical reflection of survivors adapting to primitive living after nuclear war. The audio engineers at Bethesda filtered every song to mimic the crackle of AM radio, making them feel ghostly, as if they were being broadcast from another time entirely. Fallout's use of dark comedy is deliberate and deeply rooted in its origins. In the first two games, when players chose to detonate a nuclear bomb or fail a quest catastrophically, the narrator voiced by Ron Perlman would quietly intone, "War. War never changes." The repetition of that line became one of gaming's most iconic phrases. It was written not as cynicism, but as melancholy acknowledgement of humanity's inability to break its cycles. Perlman recorded new versions for each major Fallout entry, though his favorite line remains from the very first game, where the camera pans away from the vault door into silence. There are more vaults than most players ever discover. Many exist only in lore or terminal logs. Vault 12 inches Bakersfield, California, had a door deliberately left ajar so radiation could seep in, leading to the creation of the glowing ghouls. Vault 19 divided its residents into red and blue groups and observed how paranoia spread. Vault 75 took in children and executed their parents, claiming it was for genetic purity. The more you read about these experiments, the more Vault-Tec feels less like a corporation and more like an unseen cult. The developers at Obsidian had a favorite unmarked location while building Fallout New Vegas, a skeleton under a billboard wearing a party hat with an empty bottle nearby. The team called it Birthday Boy. It had no quest or explanation, but it was placed there to remind the developers to always include something quietly human, a small laugh amid the sand. In Fallout 4, the most complex piece of animation wasn't combat or explosions, it was eating. Bethesda's animators spent weeks making sure the player could sit at a table, lift a fork, and eat a meal properly if they role-played survival. It's one of those details many never notice, but for those who play slowly, the motion feels grounding, like a brief return to normalcy in a world of ruin. Many Fallout items have real-world origins. Stimpaks were inspired by experimental battlefield injectors designed to deliver morphine quickly. Radaway's bright orange hue mimics iodine, a chemical once believed to block radiation absorption. Even Buffout's pill design was based on mid-century vitamin bottles. Fallout's artists built everything to look simultaneously practical and cartoonish, reflecting how propaganda distorted science before the bombs fell. The developers of Fallout New Vegas were especially proud of the Sunset Sarsaparilla lore. The bottles scattered around the Mojave hide special star caps, collectible tokens that lead to the Sunset Sarsaparilla headquarters. There, players can meet Festus, a malfunctioning robot who runs an unfinished contest centuries after the company's demise. The idea came from an old American myth about companies promising golden tickets and candy bars, tying nostalgia to decay. If you've ever wondered why Fallout's bottle caps became currency, the answer traces back to Fallout 1. The original game's writers wanted a lightweight, non-digital form of money. When a fan suggested bottle caps as a joke, the team realized it fit perfectly with the retro consumerism aesthetic. They even gave it lore. Caps were only valuable because the new California Republic's caravans had standardized them. That tiny throwaway concept became one of the most recognizable currencies in gaming. The mysterious stranger perk, that trench-coated gunman who appears briefly to finish off enemies, was originally supposed to have his own side quest. The idea was that the player could find his hat or track his movements across the wasteland. Time constraints cut the quest, but the stranger's theme, a few jazzy notes, followed by a gunshot, became a fan favorite. The composers loved that so much they reused the motif in Fallout 4, even when the stranger appears silently in vats. The super mutants, towering green brutes scattered across the wasteland, owe their existence to a single experiment with the Forced Evolutionary Virus, or FEV. The concept was created to explore what improvement means in a dying world. Early design documents suggested they'd be sterile, tragic remnants of human ambition. The idea stuck, and in later games, characters like Marcus and Fox added layers of wisdom and humor to the mutants' history. In the heart of Fallout's humor lies something tender. The teddy bears scattered throughout Fallout 4 often appear in strange, emotional poses: a bear in a bathtub with a rubber duck, another at a chessboard, one guarding a mini nuke. These little dioramas were placed by individual level designers as stress relief during late development nights. Over time, they became a signature detail, tiny islands of softness in a harsh world. The ghouls, those tragic beings burned by radiation yet immortal in decay, have changed visually across each game. In early entries, they looked almost skeletal, but Bethesda chose to make them more humanized, inspired by the concept of rotting hope. Voice actors were told to sound tired but kind, as if remembering what being human once felt like. The ghoul city of Underworld in Fallout 3 was intentionally placed in the Museum of History, a quiet metaphor about forgotten people living among forgotten relics. When Fallout 76 launched, its map was based on real locations in West Virginia. Morgantown, Charleston, and the Mothman Museum all exist outside the game. The inclusion of regional folklore was a deliberate attempt to make Appalachia feel like a haunted memory rather than a pure wasteland. The Mothman itself was given multiple personalities, from a watcher to a prophet, mirroring how local legends shift depending on who tells the story. Nuka-Cola Quantum, the glowing blue drink first introduced in Fallout 3, was inspired by fan theories about irradiated beverages. Bethesda wanted it to look dangerously appealing. The prop team used ultraviolet reactive dye in real bottles for promotional materials, making them shine under blacklight. Its in-game description calls it twice the calories, twice the carbohydrates, twice the caffeine, and twice the taste, a perfect parody of corporate excess. A hidden developer room in Fallout 76 caused controversy when players stumbled upon it by accident. Inside were every item and weapon in the game, neatly lined up. It wasn't meant to be accessible, it was a testing space for internal QA. Bethesda had to remove players who entered it, but many took screenshots before leaving, preserving it like an urban legend. Even in a digital wasteland, curiosity finds a way. The Protectrons, those slow-moving robots with polite voices and heavy steps, were designed to feel outdated even in Fallout's pre-war world. Their voices mimic customer service recordings from mid-century America. The line, "Law and order will be restored," was intentionally delivered without emotion, highlighting the eerie calm of automation enforcing rules long after civilization's end. Power armor, though mighty, has its own quiet lore. The first models, like the T-4-5D, were meant for infantry support during the Anchorage reclamation. Later suits like the T-51B improved mobility and reduced power drain, eventually leading to the massive X-1 prototypes. Bethesda gave each armor its own sound profile, so fans could tell the difference by ear alone, the heavy hydraulic hiss of a T-60 versus the cleaner click of the T-51B. The Red Rocket gas stations, scattered like fossils across every Fallout game, were originally meant to serve as rest points, similar to inns in fantasy RPGs. Designers filled them with loot and hidden terminals, referencing a lost pre-war highway network. The company's mascot, the Red Rocket Pup, even has a full design document that was never used, describing him as a loyal dog who never runs out of gas. The Nuka Girl pinup seen on posters across the series was modeled after a real actress Bethesda hired for promotional art. Her image was then stylized into a painted poster reminiscent of 1950s pulp magazine covers. The artist responsible also hid his initials in her helmet design, something players discovered years later by zooming in during photo mode, and scattered among all the chaos are the radio's constant companions across every journey. The sound of a distant broadcast looping in the background has a strangely comforting rhythm. In New Vegas, Radio New Vegas DJ, Mr. New Vegas was voiced by Wayne Newton himself, the legendary singer. His lines were written to sound like a lullaby to the desert, gentle, smooth, and a little lonely. The idea was that he was less a DJ and more a ghost, endlessly speaking into the static for whoever might still be alive to listen. Through every mutation, every glowing ruin, and every song playing softly against the wind, the Fallout world hums with memory. It's not just a world after the end, it's a reflection of how we hold on, how we keep making meaning even when everything else fades away. If you ever pause and look closely at the faded billboards across the wasteland, you'll notice that many of them tell stories all on their own. The peeling paint and slogans of a world long gone ads for Abraxo Cleaner, Sugar Bomb cereal, and Nuka-Cola are layered with dark humor. Bethesda's artists created dozens of unique posters that players might only glimpse once in passing. Each design mimics genuine 1950s marketing language, complete with rhymes, cheesy taglines, and mascots smiling through catastrophe. The poster for Sugar Bombs, for instance, proudly calls them the breakfast of atomic champions. Even the font choices were researched from real advertisements of the era to keep the illusion alive that this destroyed world once believed in the power of branding. Many of Fallout's creatures began as ordinary animals whose models were distorted and repurposed with radioactive mutations. The mole rats were first designed with the same skeletal base as dogs, but their skin was peeled back to give a raw, diseased texture. The bloat flies, buzzing nuisances of the wasteland, were built from a study of horseflies and dragonflies. Their sound designers layered together recordings of small electric motors and wet chewing noises to create that unsettling hum. And then there are the Deathclaws creatures, originally inspired by the velociraptors in Jurassic Park. Their concept art began as sketches of demons, but the artists adjusted them to be more animalistic, giving the sense of a predator that adapted too well. In the earliest version of Fallout 1, they were going to speak in broken English, but that idea was dropped to preserve their primal mystery. Some of the most haunting details in the Fallout series come from the way the world remembers the war itself. The Great War lasted only about 2 hours. That single afternoon was all it took to erase the world as people knew it. This brevity was intentional. It underscored how fragile everything was. The developers wanted players to realize that humanity's downfall didn't come from years of fighting, but from a brief, unstoppable chain of events. In pre-war terminals and recordings, you can find fragments of that day. Phone calls cut off mid-sentence, radio announcers still urging calm as the bombs fall, and scientists desperately trying to save data before the lights go out. It's a world built on echoes. Even the vault doors have stories. Every one of them is uniquely numbered and modeled. The distinctive grinding sound when a vault opens was created using recordings of old submarine hatches mixed with construction machinery. The massive hydraulic motion you see when the door rolls away was meant to evoke the feeling of being born again, stepping out from metal confinement into the chaos beyond. Todd Howard once said in an interview that the vault door opening is the heartbeat of every Fallout. It's the moment of hope before the despair. Inside those vaults, the experiments ranged from tragic to absurd. Vault 108, for example, was filled entirely with clones of one man named Gary, each one repeating his own name over and over again. The developers designed it to play like a horror story told through repetition. Another vault, number 118, located in the Fallout 4 DLC Far Harbor, was populated only by the preserved brains of wealthy individuals who uploaded themselves into robot bodies, forever attending an endless cocktail party, and Vault 81 held scientists studying disease immunity using their own residents as subjects, an idea inspired by real medical ethics debates. These stories work quietly in the background, each vault a social experiment gone wrong, echoing humanity's arrogance even after the end. The Nuka-Cola Corporation's history within Fallout is deeper than most players realize. Before the bombs fell, there were over 17 flavors, from Nuka Cherry to Nuka Dark and the elusive Nuka Grape. The developers created detailed mock advertisements for each one, including jingles that never made it into the game. The Nuka-Cola Quantum flavor glowed not because of radiation, but because of a fictional additive called quantum isotopes, which supposedly made the drink twice as energetic. The lore even suggests the drink caused health problems in pre-war America, a quiet jab at real-world soft drink controversies. The Enclave, one of the most secretive organizations in Fallout, was meant to embody the paranoia of the Cold War government. Their logo, a stylized letter E surrounded by wings, was designed to look like something between a military patch and a corporate brand. Their propaganda broadcasts in Fallout 3 were voiced by President John Henry Eden, played by Malcolm McDowell. His calm, polite tone was chosen deliberately to contrast with the brutality of the Enclave's actions, reflecting the theme that tyranny can often sound civilized. Eden himself is later revealed to be an artificial intelligence, continuing the trend of Fallout's obsession with humanity's reliance on machines to speak for them. Robco Industries, the company behind much of the pre-war technology, has its fingerprints on almost everything: terminals, protectrons, even the Pip-Boy itself. Its founder, Robert House, appears centuries later as the preserved magnate ruling New Vegas from his tower. His story is one of calculated survival, a man who used cryogenic technology to cheat death and continue ruling long after humanity collapsed. House's character is loosely inspired by Howard Hughes, the eccentric billionaire who isolated himself while controlling vast companies. The idea that one man could survive by sealing himself in luxury while the world burned around him perfectly captures Fallout's satire of unchecked capitalism. Even the smallest background items in Fallout carry purpose. The toy cars scattered across ruined homes have license plates and serial numbers you can read if you zoom in. The chessboards often have one missing piece, always the king, a symbolic touch that Bethesda artists included across multiple games. There's even a set of dominoes where one tile is cracked, implying someone slammed it down in frustration. These are not scripted or referenced in dialogue. They exist simply to make the world feel lived in. Some of Fallout's earliest weapons were born out of playful experimentation. The plasma rifle, with its distinct green glow, was initially designed to shoot slow-moving projectiles so players could dodge and appreciate the visual trail. The sound effect came from a mix of electrical arcs, soda cans being opened, and slowed down laser recordings. The laser musket in Fallout 4, a weapon that must be cranked to fire, was designed to give players the feeling of 19th century black powder weapons fused with atomic tech. It's both primitive and futuristic, perfectly fitting Fallout's theme of regression disguised as progress. Fallout's world building often draws from real places. In Fallout 3, Rivet City was modeled after an actual aircraft carrier, the USS Intrepid, docked in New York City. Bethesda's team visited it for research, studying how cramped corridors and metal acoustics would sound. They used similar techniques to capture the echo of footsteps and the way voices carry through steel. In New Vegas, the Hoover Dam was recreated using satellite imaging, but the developers had to simplify it for performance reasons. Still, the layout matches almost exactly, including the visitor center and maintenance tunnels. The idea of radiation storms in Fallout 4 came from a happy accident during testing. Developers were experimenting with weather effects when a lighting bug caused the sky to turn green. Instead of fixing it, they decided to turn it into a gameplay feature. The storms became one of the game's most memorable atmospheric moments, complete with the faint hum of Geiger counters blending into wind and thunder. The art team said they wanted players to feel the air buzzing. While the world of Fallout is grim, its humor has always been essential. One of the most beloved examples is the Wild Wasteland trait from Fallout New Vegas. It adds absurd events that break tension, like finding a refrigerator containing a skeleton wearing a fedora, referencing Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Without the trait active, the fridge is simply empty. The idea came from Obsidian's desire to honor Fallout's original absurdity while giving players the option to tone it down if they preferred pure immersion. Fallout's radio hosts often reflect the personality of the region. Three Dog's energetic broadcasts in Fallout 3 stand in sharp contrast to Mr. New Vegas's soothing charm, while Travis Miles from Fallout 4 starts shy and gradually becomes confident as players complete his quests. This progression mirrors Fallout's broader message of resilience, people adapting, growing stronger, even when the world refuses to heal. The radio stations are more than music, they're the heartbeat of civilization trying to hum again. Many Fallout fans overlook the detail that Ghoul's eyes glow faintly in darkness. The effect was added in Fallout 3 and refined later to make encounters more haunting in dim ruins. It's a subtle, barely visible gleam that only becomes apparent when you stop and stare. The developers said they wanted ghouls to feel halfway between human and specter, something that lingers instead of lives. The sound design of the series is a masterpiece of subtle craftsmanship. Every Pip-Boy click, every menu beep, and every rustle of radiation wind was recorded with care. The ambient hums that fill abandoned subway tunnels come from recordings of real abandoned infrastructure under Washington, D.C. The creaking noises in old houses were captured from a condemned building near Bethesda's office. They even recorded the sound of decaying metal scraping concrete to simulate broken robots dragging their limbs. The humor of Fallout's perks is another place where the series shines. Bloody Mess was first added just for fun, allowing enemies to explode in showers of gore, regardless of weapon type. It quickly became a fan favorite. Lady Killer and Black Widow were early attempts to mix charm and gameplay, allowing flirtatious dialogue that led to better outcomes. Mysterious Stranger, Grim Reaper's Sprint, and Animal Friend all highlight the absurdity and kindness that coexist in this strange universe. Even the perk names, simple, catchy, ironic, reflect Fallout's knack for turning grim survival into playfulness. Even Fallout's humor and failure is deliberate. The "you died" screens and sarcastic Vault Boy illustrations were inspired by safety cartoons from the 1950s. The developers wanted death to feel absurd, not cruel, a reminder that even in catastrophe, laughter persists. Some of the Vault Boy death poses, like being crushed by a piano or struck by lightning while holding a kite, are direct parodies of old safety posters from the atomic age. That smiling face, no matter how grim the context, became Fallout's enduring symbol, optimism that refuses to die. There's a kind of peace in Fallout's ruins, a slow rhythm that comes from wandering without destination. The world hums quietly with its own melancholy music, the soft crackle of radiation, the buzz of old neon, the faint echo of your own footsteps through dust. You begin to realize that the wasteland isn't really empty at all. It's filled with stories, voices, and dreams that survive the end of everything. And as you walk through them, the boundary between past and present fades until it's just you, the wind, and the faint whisper of a civilization still trying to be remembered. The Fallout universe was built on contrasts. The laughter of a radio jingle echoing through a crater, the flicker of neon over bones, the optimism of posters still clinging to walls long after hope has gone. Every element is designed to pull you in two directions at once, to remind you that beauty and ruin often live in the same frame. Bethesda's artists described this style as retro-futuristic sorrow, a world that dreamed of tomorrow and woke up in yesterday's ashes. It's that haunting balance that makes even the smallest details feel eternal. The developers of the original Fallout wanted the wasteland to feel like a museum of what could have been. They layered the maps with artifacts that didn't belong together, military bunkers beside drive-in theaters, robots wandering through suburban streets, and jazz records spinning under flickering lights. These juxtapositions weren't just for aesthetic. They were metaphors. The old world's obsession with progress became its curse, and now its ghosts coexist with the survivors who barely understand what any of it means. Every refrigerator and billboard is a relic of that forgotten optimism. The loading screens of Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 sometimes display Vault-Tec advertisements that seem absurd at first glance. One promises eternal safety in a vault near you, another proudly declares, "Because you deserve tomorrow." These phrases were designed to sound comforting, yet hollow the way propaganda always does when the promise has failed. The smiling vault boy that accompanies them was drawn with intentional exaggeration, his grin wide enough to feel uncanny. The developers joked that his smile was 1 inch too happy. The creation of the Pip-Boy itself mirrors that same irony. Its bulky design wasn't meant to be futuristic, but retro-futuristic, an imagining of what the future might look like to someone in the 1950s. The knobs, switches, and monochrome display were inspired by early television sets and Cold War computers. Even the name, Personal Information Processor, was chosen to sound bureaucratic and clunky, like something the government would have issued rather than invented. Bethesda's team said they wanted it to feel as if IBM built the apocalypse. Inside Fallout's world, propaganda isn't limited to the past. Factions like the Enclave and the Brotherhood of Steel continue the same cycle, repeating slogans, wearing symbols, rewriting truths. The Enclave's patriotic speeches, broadcast through broken radios, are recorded in a tone of quiet conviction, as if they believe they are humanity's last hope rather than its final mistake. Their president, John Henry Eden, speaks in perfect rhythm, never raising his voice, a calm mask over a monstrous agenda. Bethesda's writers based his dialogue cadence on vintage political recordings from the 1940s, capturing the same blend of confidence and control. The world's architecture also reflects ideology. Vaults are circles of metal, sterile, uniform, and confining. The NCR's outposts in New Vegas are angular and utilitarian, modeled after World War II field bases. The Legion's camps, in contrast, use scavenged materials and Roman motifs to symbolize regression disguised as order. Every wall and doorway, every choice of brick or concrete is deliberate. Fallout's buildings are more than shelters, they're philosophies in physical form. One of the quietest pieces of storytelling in Fallout 3 happens in the Republic of Dave, a tiny settlement ruled by a man who declares himself president of his own miniature nation. His citizens really just family, and a few wanderers vote in regular elections where Dave always wins. It's absurd, but also touching. Bethesda included it as commentary on humanity's instinct to rebuild structure, even if that structure means nothing. The Republic of Dave survives, not because it matters, but because its people need something to believe in. The food companies of the old world still leave their mark. Dandy Boy apples, sugar bombs, and Cram were modeled after real 1950s packaging, scanned and then aged to look brittle and flaked. Some of the faded text on their boxes includes jokes. Sugar bombs claim to be explosively delicious, while Dandy Boy apples proudly declare, now with 100% less worms. Abraxo Cleaner boxes hide a faint slogan near the bottom that reads, "The science of clean now government approved." The humor is dark, but consistent. Even in fiction, corporate branding never dies. The Brotherhood of Steel's hierarchy was built around medieval imagery. Paladins, scribes, and knights each represent facets of devotion to knowledge. The armor itself, heavy and impractical, mirrors religious relics more ceremonial than functional. Early concept art even depicted them with red capes and decorative crests, before being simplified to maintain realism. Bethesda's lore writers noted that their doctrine intentionally blurs the line between science and superstition. They hoard technology the way monks once hoarded books, reciting mechanical prayers to machines they barely understand. One of the rarest creatures in Fallout's wastelands is the Wanamingo, an alien-looking being that first appeared in Fallout 2. It was designed to resemble a cross between an octopus and a hairless reptile. Fans once speculated it was an extraterrestrial species, but developer notes later revealed it was an experiment gone wrong. Its eerie, translucent skin was created using layered gelatin textures. Though the creature disappeared in later games, references to it remain hidden in notes and graffiti, keeping it alive through rumor. The Nuka World amusement park expansion in Fallout 4 is a perfect microcosm of the series' philosophy. Bright lights, laughter, and mascots all exist in a place that no longer has joy. The developers studied the layout of Disneyland and other mid-century parks to make Nuka World feel authentic. The mascots were each given backstories, from Cappy and Bottle to the unseen animatronic performers that once sang in restaurants. Even the monorail that leads to the park was designed with deliberate optimism, a straight, hopeful path into madness. Fallout's animals often embody nature's strange humor. The mole rat's burrowing animations were modeled after prairie dogs, filmed in slow motion. The radstags of Fallout 4, with their eerie second heads, were built using the skeleton of a real deer scanned and digitally warped. The two heads move independently because each is rigged with its own AI controller. Sometimes, in the game, one head will look at the player while the other grazes an unintentional, eerie grace that makes the creature feel alive in its wrongness. The storytellers of Fallout understand that silence carries meaning. In Fallout New Vegas, the ghost town of Nipton tells its story entirely through aftermath. Charred bodies, lottery tickets, and the triumphant speeches of a madman named Vulpes Inculta. You arrive too late to intervene, yet the message is clear. Cruelty doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it simply leaves evidence. These static moments are among Fallout's most powerful reminders that horror, when quiet, becomes reflection. The word rad in Fallout's world is more than shorthand for radiation. It's also a linguistic relic. People still say rad as slang for cool, even as they measure their exposure in the same word. It's an intentional irony, the idea that language itself refuses to adapt, even when the meaning should have changed. The world clings to the vocabulary of optimism long after optimism stopped existing. The Fat Man mini-nuke launcher, one of the most infamous weapons in Fallout, was based loosely on a real nuclear artillery device called the Davy Crockett. The name Fat Man references the atomic bomb dropped on Nagasaki. The developers almost cut the weapon for being too absurd, but its comedic overkill fit Fallout's tone perfectly. The sound effect of the mini-nuke's whistle as it flies through the air was created by recording a small metal ball rolling down a pipe, then stretching the audio to sound distant. It's a toy that sounds like tragedy. Vault 94 in Fallout 76 was home to pacifists, musicians, and idealists. They tried to create a society built on cooperation rather than survival of the fittest. Their experiment, like all the others, ended in failure. The vault was eventually overrun by plants, mutated through spores, a living garden devouring its creators. The team at Bethesda called this vault the tragedy of harmony, a story about good intentions collapsing under the weight of reality. Fallout's writers often use humor as anesthesia for sorrow. In Fallout 4, the Silver Shroud radio drama plays like a campy superhero adventure, but the quest tied to it becomes deeply human about vengeance, identity, and the blurred line between pretending to be a hero and becoming one. The player's ability to act out the Shroud's lines in character was one of Bethesda's proudest narrative experiments. It let players perform fiction within fiction, a reminder that stories are the last thing humanity forgets how to create. When players first step into the Commonwealth, the music shifts subtly from eerie to warm. That change in tone isn't random. Composer Enon Zur structured the score around emotional geography tension in ruins, melancholy in suburbs, and serenity near nature. The music you hear, near rivers or open fields, often uses soft strings and woodwinds, symbolizing that even the wasteland still breathes. He once said he wanted every note to feel like a whisper of what the earth remembers. The series' connection to real-world places is deeper than it seems. Megaton in Fallout 3 was inspired by the American town of Centralia, Pennsylvania, a place abandoned after a mine fire burned underground for decades. The idea of a community living beside a dormant bomb came from the image of people in denial, choosing normalcy over fear. The glowing bomb at the heart of Megaton was programmed to pulse slowly, almost like a heartbeat, to make it feel alive, a sleeping god in the middle of town. In Fallout 4, the Diamond City Guards casually mention a pre-war baseball legend named Swatters, a playful misunderstanding of the sport's purpose. They think baseball was a violent battle, fought with spiked bats instead of a game. This small detail was added purely for humor, but it also represents how culture distorts over time. The developers loved the idea that future generations would reinterpret ancient history through fragments and mistakes, and so every aspect of Fallout, from its songs to its storms, carries that balance of absurdity and reflection. It's a series about the world ending, but it's also about what happens next, about the way people rebuild, reimagine, and retell. In the end, Fallout isn't really about war, radiation, or ruin. It's about memory, about how stories survive even when everything else fades. When you walk across the wasteland in Fallout, the world feels ancient yet stubbornly alive. Grass pushes through cracked pavement, ivy climbs the skeletons of buildings, and the wind moves through the rusted husks of cars like breath through ribs. The artist behind Fallout once described the series as a love letter to decay, a place where beauty exists precisely because it's broken. They wanted players to feel small, not powerless, but humbled as though they were travelers in the ruins of their own civilization. The cars that litter the roads of the wasteland are relics of pre-war design, inspired by 1950s optimism about the atomic future. Their fins are exaggerated, their windshields impossibly curved, and their frames coated in heavy chrome. Bethesda modeled each car as if it could once hover, using atomic propulsion instead of gasoline. That's why every vehicle in Fallout explodes when struck. The reactors inside them are still unstable centuries later. The design choice was deliberate, meant to remind players that even the smallest piece of the old world still carries danger. One of the most subtle pieces of storytelling in Fallout comes from its mannequins. You find them standing in strange places, gathered around tables, pointing at walls, or arranged like witnesses. These mannequins were added by designers who wanted to create an atmosphere of unease, suggesting that something once human still lingers in the empty spaces. In Fallout 4, their placement often mirrors real social scenes: poker games, theater audiences, dinner parties. Some are even dressed in pre-war clothing. It's as if the ghosts of civilization tried to recreate life with whatever they had left. The advertising billboards, scattered across the wasteland, also carry fragments of history. One for Blast Radius board games proudly reads, "Fun for the whole nuclear family." Another promotes Red Rocket gas stations with the slogan, "Fuel for the future." These ads are bright and cheerful even as they overlook ruins and craters. The developers intentionally left them untouched by weathering in certain areas, as if propaganda itself were indestructible, forever smiling above disaster. The Fallout series often uses visual storytelling to capture the passing of time. In vaults, for instance, the deeper you go, the more modern the design becomes. The early levels resemble 1950s architecture, clean lines, and pastel panels, while the lower floors shift into stainless steel, glass, and harsh fluorescent lighting. This gradient symbolizes the journey from comfort to control, showing how safety slowly turned into surveillance. The first vaults were marketed as havens, but by the last generations, they had become laboratories. The story of the vault experiments was never meant to be purely fictional. It draws heavily from real Cold War fears about population control, behavioral science, and the ethics of survival. Fallout's writers studied historical projects like Operation Plowshare and human radiation experiments conducted during the mid-20th century. The vaults became a mirror for those horrors, scientific ambition hiding behind patriotic slogans. When you find a log written by an overseer justifying another cruel test, it feels chillingly real because it echoes history rather than fantasy. The term post-apocalypse has come to define Fallout, but the series rarely treats it as an ending. It's more like a beginning that went wrong. Todd Howard once said that the world of Fallout isn't about doom, it's about what people do afterward. That's why the games are filled with farming tools, workbenches, and improvised homes. Every rusty shack is proof of persistence. Even the raiders, violent and unhinged, are part of that same struggle. They're survivors who chose savagery over rebuilding. In the end, Fallout's apocalypse isn't destruction, it's adaptation. The NCR, or New California Republic, is one of the best examples of humanity's attempt to rebuild order. Its flag, with the two-headed bear, symbolizes both unity and division, two minds trying to act as one. In New Vegas, the NCR is portrayed not as a villain, but as bureaucracy incarnate. Noble in intent, flawed in execution, the writers wanted to show that even when civilization returns, it brings its old mistakes with it: greed, politics, and pride. The NCR soldiers' uniforms were designed to resemble a mix of ranger and military surplus gear, as if stitched together from the memories of lost nations. On the opposite end of ideology stands Caesar's Legion, a brutal society modeled after the ancient Roman Empire. Their leader, Edward Sallow, is a former follower of the Apocalypse, a scholar turned conqueror. His belief that order can only be achieved through fear reflects Fallout's recurring theme that morality bends under pressure. The Legion's banners, their red and gold color palette, and their stylized eagle insignia all come from classical inspiration, but twisted through the lens of a wasteland tyrant trying to make myth real again. The followers of the Apocalypse, though far smaller, embody the opposite philosophy. They preserve books, medicine, and education, the soft power of knowledge in a world obsessed with strength. Their name itself is intentionally paradoxical, followers of an ending who work to begin anew. The group was inspired by real post-war humanitarian movements, particularly those that formed after the Second World War. Fallout's writers saw them as the conscience of the wasteland, fragile but necessary. Even Fallout's monsters often come from humanity's own mistakes. The centaurs, those grotesque hybrids of limbs and flesh, were originally created as failed FEV experiments. Their design came from a sketch that mixed the structure of a human with the biology of a dog, resulting in an abomination that feels both tragic and horrifying. The glowing ghouls, meanwhile, were designed to embody the line between life and death. They emit light, not just as a gameplay mechanic, but as a metaphor, a body that's both dying and illuminating. The real-world influences behind Fallout stretch far beyond video games. The series owes much to Mad Max, A Boy and His Dog, and The Road Warrior, but also to books like On the Beach and The Day of the Triffids. Even classic radio dramas influenced its storytelling, inspiring the tone of its radio hosts and quest dialogue. Fallout's narrative style, part documentary, part dark comedy, grew from these mid-century visions of apocalypse that treated the end of the world as both tragedy and absurdity. One of the most quietly powerful elements of Fallout is its use of religion. From the Church of the Children of Adam to the Hubologists, faith in the series takes strange, mutated forms. The Children of Adam worship radiation as divine light, believing each explosion to be a holy event. The Hubologists, meanwhile, parody real-world cult movements, preaching transcendence through pseudoscience. These religions serve as reflections of humanity's eternal need for belief, even when the object of that belief destroys them. Fallout's world feels authentic because it remembers what came before the bombs. Pre-war holotapes, radio recordings, and journals don't just tell backstory, they humanize it. A woman recording a love confession moments before impact, a soldier joking about rations before the alarm sounds, a child's laughter interrupted by static. These small, ordinary voices echo louder than any explosion. They remind players that the wasteland isn't haunted by monsters, it's haunted by people. In Fallout 3, the Museum of History's underworld, a city built entirely by ghouls, is one of the series' most touching locations. The ghouls who live there see themselves not as monsters, but as historians preserving what's left of humanity. Their home, filled with broken statues and repurposed exhibits, is a metaphor for their own existence, broken, preserved, misunderstood. The leader, Carol, even speaks of remembering the day the bombs fell. She's not undead because of magic or mutation. She's undead because Fallout's world refuses to let go of its past. In Fallout 4, the companion Nick Valentine embodies that same idea of memory outliving the flesh. A synth detective with the memories of a dead man, Nick is a walking contradiction, human empathy built from wires. His dialogue was written to blend melancholy with warmth, and his voice actor was told to imagine an old movie star who still believes in doing the right thing. Nick's story arc, torn between who he was and who he is, now mirrors the entire series. In Fallout, identity is never static. It's always what survives after everything else is taken away. Even the smallest ambient details carry purpose. The flickering streetlights that still work centuries later use atomic bulbs in lore. The distant howling wind changes pitch depending on your elevation. The rustling paper in abandoned offices was recorded using real decaying books that sound almost like whispers when moved. Every texture, every echo, every grain of dust is placed to create immersion that feels natural, not theatrical. Fallout's world breathes because it decays in real time. The reason so many players find peace wandering through Fallout isn't just nostalgia or exploration, it's because the games capture stillness in a way few others do. There are moments where nothing happens, no combat, no dialogue, no urgency, and yet you feel something profound. The creak of a sign in the wind, the slow turn of a radio dial, the faint hum of your Pip-Boy screen in the dark. Those small, meaningless moments become sacred. In a world built from ruin, quiet is the only thing that still feels whole. There's something quietly timeless about Fallout's ruins, the way they feel both familiar and alien at once. When you walk through the shattered skeleton of a school or a rusted diner, you can almost hear the echoes of laughter and clinking dishes. The developers often describe the wasteland not as a dead world, but as a paused one. The bombs didn't erase life, they froze it. Everything still stands exactly where it was, the moment history stopped. That illusion of time being trapped gives Fallout its haunting calm, a museum of mistakes preserved in perfect silence. In every Fallout game, the color palette tells its own story. The Capital Wasteland glows with a sickly yellow haze, evoking radiation and exhaustion. The Mojave stretches in muted golds and desert reds, symbolizing harsh honesty and sunlight that never hides truth. The Commonwealth of Fallout 4 returns to greens and blues, a hint of hope creeping back into the gray. Bethesda's artists intentionally shifted tones from game to game to mirror emotional evolution, from despair to endurance to rebirth. Even the sky's hue carries meaning. The wildlife across Fallout's worlds has evolved in eerie, poetic ways. The rad scorpions, some of the most intimidating creatures in the series, were inspired by emperor scorpions photographed under ultraviolet light. Their glowing tails were added to make them visible in the dark, a subtle reminder that beauty and danger often share the same glow. The bloatflies, grotesque yet almost pitiful, were animated with a slightly clumsy flight pattern so they'd look unnatural, as if gravity itself were rejecting them. The two-headed Brahmin, iconic beasts of burden across the wasteland, were designed to appear both grotesque and gentle, a symbol of how life, though twisted, still finds purpose. Every city or settlement in Fallout exists for a reason, and most are built on something symbolic. Megaton was born around faith, a town built beside the very weapon that ended the world. Rivet City was built on the remnants of ambition, a society clinging to a ship that never sailed. Diamond City was built on nostalgia survivors, taking shelter inside a stadium meant for cheering, laughter, and community. Each location in Fallout is its own parable about how people rebuild meaning after meaning itself has collapsed. The weapons that players carry tell stories too. The laser rifle, that sleek piece of pre-war innovation, was based on Cold War-era military concept art, imagined through the lens of atomic optimism. The plasma rifle, slower but deadlier, represents excess over-designed, overheated, and overkill. Then there's the humble pipe pistol, one of Fallout 4's defining weapons. It's crude and ugly, built from scrap metal, yet more reliable than the technology that came before it. The message is quiet but clear. Simplicity survives. In Fallout New Vegas, the contrast between the strip's neon lights and the surrounding desert was meant to symbolize illusion, the last mirage of civilization in a world that's long forgotten what civilization means. The glowing signs and smiling casino mascots all promise wealth, luck, and glamour, yet everything underneath is rot and dust. Obsidian's writers said they wanted the Strip to feel like a party thrown by ghosts. Every light bulb on the Strip was hand-placed, designed to shimmer just bright enough to seem alive when viewed from afar, but dim and flickering once you step inside. Fallout's dialogue is full of subtle writing decisions that give it its charm. The repetition of phrases like, "Another glorious day in this man's army," or "Law and order will be restored by robots," isn't laziness, it's conditioning. The world is filled with machines that have never been turned off, endlessly repeating their instructions because no one told them to stop. It's both funny and tragic, a reminder that the systems humanity built to serve it are now the only things still working. The idea of karma, introduced in early Fallout titles, wasn't meant as moral judgment but as reflection. It wasn't about right or wrong, it was about balance, helping a stranger, stealing food, saving a town, or destroying one. Every choice carried weight, but not punishment. Fallout's morality system was built on ambiguity because its creators believed that survival rarely fits cleanly into good and evil. Even the perks that affect karma, like Devil's Highway or Escalator to Heaven, are playful titles masking deeper commentary that every act of kindness or cruelty adds up to the same inevitable truth: people adapt. Vault-Tec's experiments remain one of the darkest running threads across every game. Some were designed to test sociology, others psychology, and a few disturbingly theology. Vault 51, for instance, from Fallout 76, used an artificial intelligence called ZAX to decide leadership through social observation, while Vault 77 confined one man with nothing but a box of puppets. These cruel social studies were meant to reveal human nature under pressure, but the irony is that the only constant in Vault-Tec's data was failure. The company claimed to be building a better tomorrow, yet every vault ended the same way: in madness, death, or decay. The sound design in Fallout deserves its own legend. The hum of Geiger counters, the soft crackle of radios, and the reverb of voices in concrete tunnels all work together to create immersion so subtle it's almost subconscious. The Pip-Boy's clicking wheel sound, for instance, was made by recording a typewriter from the 1940s, its keys pressed at half speed to make them sound mechanical but gentle. The sound of Nuka-Cola bottles opening was made with a real bottle cap removed underwater to give it a deeper pop. Even footsteps on dirt change slightly depending on how irradiated the ground is. These are details most players will never notice, but they shape the way the world feels real in the quiet parts between action. Fallout's obsession with the 1950s wasn't arbitrary, it was a statement about frozen time. The world before the bombs fell stopped evolving culturally around the era of optimism and paranoia. The fashion, architecture, and music all remained trapped in that atomic dream. The writers once described it as the future that never escaped yesterday. That's why you'll never see 80s punk, 90s grunge, or modern pop in Fallout culture ended when the world stopped believing in progress. The irony is that even after destruction, people still live among relics of a better tomorrow that never came. Fallout's humor has always carried sadness underneath it. The radio commercials, cheerful jingles, and absurd product names all hide dark undertones. Sugar bombs might be marketed as explosively delicious, but its tagline mocks consumer blindness. The Red Menace arcade game in Fallout 4 was designed to look like a propaganda tool turned into a toy, complete with exaggerated villains and patriotic music. Even the loading tips that show Vault Boy grinning through dismemberment or radiation sickness are meant to satirize how propaganda can make tragedy look cheerful. In Fallout 3, the scene where you leave Vault 101 is one of the most memorable moments in gaming history. After the door rolls open and light floods in, the player steps out into the wasteland for the first time. That lighting sequence was inspired by Plato's allegory of the cave, the idea of emerging from darkness into truth. Todd Howard once said that they wanted players to squint into the future. The moment lasts only seconds, but it defines the feeling of Fallout forever, the birth of freedom in a dead world. The holotapes scattered throughout every game are pieces of poetry. Some contain recordings of soldiers or scientists, but others are deeply personal family arguments, love letters, or diaries recorded in panic. The designers deliberately mix tones so that not every story ends in horror. Some holotapes are funny, absurd, or mundane, like a recording of someone arguing with their refrigerator robot about milk. These touches remind the player that humanity didn't disappear because of evil. It disappeared because of ordinary life, interrupted too soon. The Nuka-Cola Museum in Fallout 4's Nuka World expansion hides one of the strangest artifacts in the series, the Thirst Zapper, a toy water gun redesigned into a weapon. Its absurdity fits perfectly within Fallout's tradition of turning innocence into irony. Bethesda included it as a metaphor for misplaced faith in progress, the idea that even a children's toy can become deadly when reimagined through desperation. Even Fallout's loading screen quotes carry quiet wisdom. Lines like, "War never changes," or "From ignorance grows fear," serve as lullabies between chaos. They slow the pace of the game, inviting players to breathe and think. Many were pulled from fictional sources within Fallout's universe, but a few come from real philosophy. One quote, attributed to a pre-war scholar, reads, "Civilization is measured not by what it builds, but by what it refuses to destroy." It's a sentiment that captures the entire spirit of Fallout, that the real tragedy isn't the bombs, but the choices that came before them. The charm of Fallout lies in its contradictions. It's a world where machines have manners, corpses hold newspapers, and hope glows faintly under layers of ash. The games aren't about surviving the end of the world. They're about living in what comes after that quiet, gray in-between, where life persists without permission. Each scavenged Nuka bottle, each rusted radio, and each forgotten melody from before the bombs serves as proof that humanity can't stop creating, even in ruin. That's the secret heartbeat of Fallout, not despair, but defiance through memory. During testing of early remakes, one developer secretly inserted a house that contained a message reading, "You're not alone." Even when playing, the line was meant to test localization spacing, but the team liked it so much they left it buried in an inaccessible area of the map. Years later, when data miners found it, they thought it was an Easter egg. In truth, it was simply a note between creators, a quiet reassurance that even solitary journeys are shared in spirit. The animation for the move Splash doesn't actually use water. It plays a jump arc frame shared with 24 other actions, reused so often that removing it would break multiple systems. That's why it remains unchanged across generations, not just as a joke, but as the foundation of many idle animations. Its uselessness became structurally essential. Developers once considered making the Pokédex entries dynamic, updating descriptions as the player formed bonds or saw new events. The feature was partially implemented in testing and still exists in code fragments labeled version B. It would have made the Pokédex a living diary that evolved with each journey, but memory limits forced its removal. Even so, that spirit survived in companion dialogue and friendship flavor text. The reason the games never display the protagonist's father in most regions isn't narrative oversight, but design restraint. The team felt that leaving the role undefined made the journey more personal, the story of independence rather than rebellion. When later titles introduced a visible parent, the moment felt unusual precisely because absence had been the tradition. Silence became a form of storytelling. In the credits of several games, you can faintly hear sound cues synchronized to staff names, soft clicks for programmers, chimes for artists, percussion for writers. Each credit roll doubles as a hidden song of gratitude, a final piece of music made from the rhythm of those who created it. Few players notice, but the developers always called it the Song of Hands. The earliest prototype of the Pokédex theme was composed on a toy keyboard with only 6 functional keys. The composer recorded short bursts of sound and looped them manually, creating the bouncy rhythm still recognizable decades later. Each note was intended to sound like curiosity itself, uneven, playful, and full of wonder. The melody's slightly offbeat timing remains on purpose, a quiet reminder that discovery is never perfectly steady. Some early routes in development were originally designed vertically rather than horizontally. When the Game Boy's screen proved too narrow, they were rotated 90 degrees, turning north-south paths into east-west ones. That simple adjustment changed how the series structured travel forever. To this day, most journeys move left to right, not because of geography, but because of a decision made to fit a screen that was too small. The save icon in modern titles, shaped like a small rotating cymbal, still triggers a sound based on the same frequency as the earliest chime. Its pitch measures precisely 1024 Hertz, chosen because it aligned mathematically with the processor's internal clock. The developers called it the sound of certainty, believing that every save should feel like a heartbeat confirming survival. During development of the second generation, a hidden mechanic was added that slightly increases the critical hit rate of the player's first Pokémon in party after defeating the champion. The boost is minuscule, but it represents a spark of luck meant to symbolize newfound confidence. It has remained in place through multiple generations, invisible, unlisted, but persistent. Every trainer, after victory, carries a quiet bonus of courage. The concept of weather not only affected battles, but was once planned to influence dialogue. Certain townsfolk would have commented on rain or snow differently depending on time of day. The localization team created full sets of unused lines that still sit in old code banks. They describe clouds rolling in and stars hidden behind mist, poetic fragments meant for a system that arrived too early for the technology to handle it. Many of the Pokédex entries describing temperature or speed are deliberate exaggerations meant to capture imagination rather than realism. Developers once joked that they wrote them like myths told around a campfire. The extremes creatures said to melt sand, freeze magma, or circle the globe in seconds are all part of that storytelling tone. The exaggeration wasn't meant to deceive, but to keep the sense of mystery alive, as though the world of Pokémon still held tall tales and legends. In the oldest battle engines, attacks were sorted by element type in hexadecimal order, not alphabetical. This means certain unrelated moves share internal IDs because their binary codes align. For instance, fire-based moves occupy lower addresses than psychic ones, a remnant of how early programmers grouped data by color on a debugging chart rather than by theme. Modern games still preserve that order deep in their structure, a digital genealogy tracing back to the first cartridges. The Pokemart Clerk sprite, with its simple bow and open arms, was modeled after an actual shopkeeper near the developer's old office. The artist visited the store daily for snacks and admired the employees' politeness so much that they sketched her posture as reference. Years later, when 3D models were introduced, animators used the same gesture, a quiet bow, as a universal symbol of welcome in every region. Early versions of the map used actual contour lines for elevation, drawn by hand on paper and scanned into the computer. Artists later simplified them into color gradients for readability, but the original sketches were so detailed they looked like geological surveys. That attention to realism made each route feel believable, even on a pixel grid. Mountains looked climbable, rivers looked alive. Every hill in the world began as a real topographic drawing. In the beta version of the first games, the currency symbol wasn't a HEE, but a simple P standing for point. The switch happened close to release, inspired by the Japanese yen sign. Developers felt it gave the economy a sense of place, implying a world with its own financial system rather than a game mechanic. To this day, players read the EK as if it were its own fictional currency, neither yen nor dollar, but something unique to the Pokemon world. The animation for fainting during battle was once accompanied by a soft thud sound. Testers found it emotionally uncomfortable, so the effect was replaced with a neutral falling tone that descends musically rather than violently. The change transformed defeat into something melancholic rather than harsh, aligning with the franchise's belief that loss should feel like rest, not punishment. Some early test builds included a hidden fatigue meter that reduced accuracy if the player battled too long without healing. It was intended to encourage rest stops, but proved frustrating, so it was abandoned. However, traces of the idea survive in flavor text about trainers feeling tired or needing to visit Pokemon centers. Even when scrapped, the concept of balance between effort and recovery remained embedded in the series' philosophy. A region's design team often starts with its central landmark, a tower, volcano, or lake, and builds outward. They describe this as finding the heart of the map. Every other location forms in relation to that single feature, ensuring the world feels cohesive. The oldest maps began with a single mountain. Newer ones began with a city or an academy, but the principle never changed. Worlds are born from one beating center. The cry for certain bird Pokemon contains an echo effect that subtly reverses at the end, simulating the Doppler shift of sound moving past the player. This was among the first examples of stereo audio used in a handheld game. Sound engineers referred to it as the wind trick. Though technology has advanced, that same method, playing reverse samples to mimic distance, is still used in modern console titles. Trainers' rooms in starting towns nearly always include a television. The developers say it represents connection between worlds, a screen through which the player looks at another screen. Early dialogue even had the TV display a message reading, "You see yourself reflected faintly." It was removed for simplicity, but the symbolism of reflection remained in later titles, where mirrors, lakes, and windows often mark beginnings. When multiplayer trading became possible without cables, one of the programmers brought his daughter to the office to try it. She sent a low-level creature across the wireless connection, and when the data transfer finished, the entire team applauded. That single moment, a child sharing joy across invisible airwaves, convinced them that the feature had succeeded emotionally, not just technically. The programmer kept that creature on his save file for years, renaming it Proof. Some berries in the games are coded with scent values that correspond to internal taste variables. These values serve no gameplay purpose, but were intended for a scrapped accessory that would emit faint fragrances when connected to a handheld system. The device never launched, but the code remains ghost data for an all-factory system that was decades ahead of its time. The motion of the camera during battles has always followed the same rule. It tilts slightly toward the attacking Pokémon, then resets halfway before landing the hit. This creates the illusion of depth even in flat pixel graphics. The technique was borrowed from sports photography, specifically the pan used to follow a moving ball. The subtle shake after impact mimics the recoil of a camera tripod catching the motion. Developers testing the 3D transition found that low-resolution textures often made creatures appear cuter because their features blurred slightly. This softness effect was so popular that later models were intentionally rendered with reduced sharpness to preserve it. Even with modern engines capable of realism, the team still blurs edges by 1 or 2 pixels, a visual lullaby baked into every design. In the earliest concept pitches, the main character's mother was described as a keeper of quiet dreams. Her role was to embody rest and safety between adventures, explaining why she rarely leaves home but always welcomes the player back with calm dialogue and healing words. That tone of maternal reassurance became a defining part of the series, the reminder that no matter how far you travel, someone is waiting peacefully at home. The bicycle, fishing rod, and running shoes all share the same item ID prefix in the code, MVT, short for movement. They were designed as extensions of exploration rather than possessions. The lead designer said these tools represent freedom in 3 forms: speed, patience, and persistence. Riding shows excitement, fishing shows focus, running shows joy. Together, they define what it means to move forward. The reason battle music loops seamlessly while overworld themes fade is intentional psychology. Fading music signals calm, looping music signals focus. The transition between the two mimics how adrenaline feels sudden, then steady. When peace returns after battle, the fade gently resets your heart rate, almost like guided breathing. The composers knew players would spend hours cycling through tension and release, so they built a rhythm that matched the body's own. A small handful of NPCs throughout the series reference dreams, time loops, or déjà vu. These aren't random Easter eggs. They're deliberate callbacks written by a single scenario writer who worked on multiple titles. Each line connects loosely to the idea that memory and imagination overlap. Fans have pieced together his identity through interviews, calling him the Dream Scribe. He once said that the point of Pokémon is not catching them all, but remembering what we once believed could be real. The final testing cartridge of the original game still exists in a vault at the company's headquarters. It's labeled with tape that reads "Let's Begin," written in marker by hand. That same phrase appears on the title screen of many later entries in different forms. Your adventure begins. Let's go. Begin your journey. Every time those words appear, they echo that single piece of handwriting preserved on a fading label from nearly 30 years ago. The designers of the earliest towns often began by sketching their own neighborhoods from memory. They removed cars, added fields, and simplified buildings until the landscapes felt both familiar and impossible. That's why the first towns in the series carry a strange sense of comfort. They're built from half-remembered childhoods, places that never existed but feel like they should. One artist said he drew his grandmother's house into every new region, changing its roof color each time so it would never stand out but always be there. The faint clicking sound before a Pokeball locks in place was recorded using a stapler. Engineers experimented with snapping pencils and knocking coins, but the stapler produced the perfect rhythm of tension and release. When slowed slightly and layered with digital echo, it became the signature noise of capture the heartbeat pause before relief. Players all over the world recognized that sound without realizing it came from something so mundane. The naming of colors in early versions was not artistic, but technical. Each color was stored as a 2-digit hexadecimal code, meaning hues were defined by numbers rather than adjectives. When localization teams later needed to name new versions, they looked at those codes and realized red and green were literally embedded in the programming. The sequels followed that same pattern, turning mathematical values into poetry. An unused character sprite in the original data shows a small girl holding a lantern. No dialogue or location references her, but her model is fully animated. Developers have never confirmed her purpose. Some fans believe she was meant to appear in caves as a guide for lost players, a gentle light in the dark that was cut for pacing. Her existence is a reminder that even unspoken kindness can linger unseen within a game's memory. The developer's internal nickname for the save file system was Soulbag. It stored not only player progress, but personality data such as time played, items favored, and choices made. Programmers joked that if they ever lost the cartridge, they'd lose their second self. This small philosophy shaped how the series treats save files not as data to overwrite, but as lives to preserve. The concept of regional Pokédex numbers aligning differently between games was intentional. It symbolized how knowledge expands as the world grows. When a species number changes from one region to another, it reflects the perspective of new researchers, cataloging the same life in a different culture. What seems like inconsistency is actually world-building each land with its own way of understanding life. Some of the earliest musical compositions were limited to 4 channels, meaning only 4 simultaneous sounds could play. Composers had to make melodies that implied harmony through rhythm instead of layering. They compared it to painting with 2 colors and letting the mind imagine the rest. Even today, with orchestral soundtracks, that minimalism lingers. The most memorable tunes remain those that sound like lullabies humming through static. The bicycle roads found in One Generation are angled specifically to match the curvature of the Earth if scaled upward. Developers used real cartographic data to calculate the slope so that the incline would feel natural. Players may never notice, but their sense of momentum and gravity comes from that realism. It's one of the earliest examples of scientific precision hidden inside a work of art designed for children. One early concept for the Pokeball opening animation included visible fingers pressing the button, but it was removed because the human hand felt intrusive in a world meant to celebrate partnership rather than ownership. The team instead replaced it with the simple click of light, letting imagination fill the gap. That restraint, showing less to feel more, has defined the series ever since. During localization, the translators maintained an internal list called the Emotion Dictionary. It contained alternate versions of key phrases like, "It's super effective," rewritten in dozens of tones: excitement, calm, triumph, and awe. They used the one that best matched each language's emotional rhythm. This attention to feeling, rather than words, explains why even non-literal translations of the series still sound like home. The fishing mechanic in One Generation was originally far more complex, involving line tension and reel timing, but testers found that simplicity, waiting for a single prompt, felt more satisfying than realism. Developers described the feeling as a heartbeat underwater, The simplified version won, reminding the team that rhythm matters more than detail when designing calm experiences. The overworld sprite for the player character always includes a hat for a reason. Designers discovered that adding a clear outline to the head made it easier to recognize direction at a glance. When the hat became tradition, they kept it not just for clarity, but symbolism, curiosity protected by confidence. The brim's tilt, slightly forward, represents the act of looking ahead. The dialogue written for young trainers on routes often includes words of self-encouragement. One child might say, "Someday, I'll be as strong as you," or "I'm training every day." These lines were placed deliberately to mirror the player's own progress. Each generation, new dialogue is written to reflect the optimism of its audience's era. The series quietly grows with its players, aging through hope rather than time. A few of the musical instruments used in modern remakes are sampled directly from the original Game Boy's sound chip. The composers preserve those digital imperfections, the slight hiss, the uneven pitch bend, as a texture beneath orchestral layers. It's nostalgia embedded in harmony, bridging decades of evolution. The past literally hums inside the present. In several regions, the layout of forests forms hidden shapes when viewed from the full map: spirals, hearts, and even letters. These were placed intentionally by level designers who treated the natural world as a kind of quiet art gallery. Players rarely notice because the camera never shows them all at once, but from above, the patterns spell emotions. One famous heart-shaped forest was designed as a love letter to the franchise itself. The decision to make the player's companion follow behind them in some games was not originally planned as a feature, it started as a debugging tool. Developers used a second sprite to test collision detection, and when they saw it walking in sync, they found it charming. Instead of deleting it, they polished it into one of the most beloved mechanics ever added. Some of the earliest concept sketches depict Pokémon with shadows that stretch farther than their bodies. The idea was that their personalities would be seen before their forms, silhouettes, expressing emotion. This poetic design principle still informs animation today, where even subtle movements reflect character traits. In a world built from imagination, shadows carry as much meaning as light. A hidden counter tracks how many times the player opens their bag menu. It was intended for debugging purposes, but developers kept it because it provided data about curiosity. They noticed players often open their bags just to read item descriptions again, a sign that people weren't playing only for combat, but for comfort. That quiet statistic told them that the world felt real enough to revisit even without goals. When the first region's Pokémon League was mapped, the structure was modeled after a mountain shrine rather than a stadium. Developers wanted victory to feel spiritual rather than competitive. The long corridors leading to the final chamber were designed to slow the player's heartbeat, giving the feeling of entering a sacred space. Even the music begins with silence, before building upward like a prayer. The start menu's ordering of options, Pokédex, Pokémon, Bag, Save, has remained largely unchanged since the beginning. This consistency wasn't just convenience, it was ritual. Developers treated the menu as a reflection of the trainer's priorities: knowledge first, companionship second, tools third, memory last. Every new entry preserves that philosophy, an unspoken code of what matters most in the journey. The internal clock used for time-based events actually runs faster than real time by a fraction of a second each minute. Over long play sessions, this difference accumulates, making in-game sunsets arrive earlier than expected. The discrepancy is small, about 1 minute per day, but it adds up, creating personal variations in every player's experience of dusk. The world literally moves to each individual's rhythm. A debug command known as light test generates a single glowing tile in any location. It was created to check visibility in caves, but when an artist accidentally left it active during a late night build, he described feeling comforted by the tiny light in darkness. The next day, he suggested adding more fireflies and glowing crystals to nighttime areas, turning a mistake into a motif of calm illumination. Many of the most emotional melodies in the series are written in pentatonic scales, 5 notes instead of 7. This choice makes them universally comforting, as pentatonic structures exist in lullabies across nearly every culture. The composers intentionally used that connection to create familiarity, ensuring that players everywhere would feel safe, even in unfamiliar lands. The idea of secret bases began as a simple debugging feature that let developers warp to test rooms. One of the programmers used his test room to store favorite sprites and labeled it Home. When the director discovered it, he turned the concept into a feature where every player could build a personal sanctuary. What began as a technical shortcut became a celebration of belonging. A rare unused map found in the data of a later game shows a vast plain with a single tree and a message box that reads, "Take your time." It's believed to have been a developer's personal test area, a space to walk without objectives. The message might have been written for internal use, but it fits perfectly with the series' heart, the idea that peace, too, can be progress. The main theme used in title screens always includes a rising interval at its opening note. That single upward leap musically represents hope, the essence of the entire franchise. Every generation rearranges the melody, but that first upward step never changes. It is the sound of a new beginning,